Well, welcome everyone to the Cymera 2021 opening event. It's a Thursday night. How did this happen? I'm so pleased that the team around Alba and Astra could find time in their busy schedule to do this on a Thursday, because we threw everything, including the kitchen sink, at the rest of the weekend. But we were desperately wanting to host this event, so I'm so excited that we could make it happen. And what better event to have as the opening event for the Cymera Festival 2021? Alba ad Astra, I remember the Creators Hall of Cymera 2019, the only physical event we've so far had. And Madeline Shepard was in the Creators Hall with her amazing work that she does for I'm Not. And she was telling me about this book she'd produced some years ago. And I was very intrigued. And so it's brilliant to see that Alba ad Astra, the story of Scotland's secret, unknown, and possibly lost space project, has returned to Cymera in collaboration with Shoreline of Infinity, Scotland's award-winning magazine. And we have such a stellar lineup tonight. I mean, you are setting the bar really high for the rest of the weekend. So I suspect the rest of our speakers are slightly concerned about what they have to live up to. So thank you again for putting this together. I'm so excited to see what it has turned out to be, because I haven't seen the book or any of this yet. So I'm very excited. I hope you all have a fantastic time. Make sure you order a copy of the book. It's very important. Order a copy of the book. And I'm going to hand over to Noel from Shoreline of Infinity, who will do further introductions.
Thank you very much, Anne. That was beautiful as ever. Yeah, we're very excited to be here at the first event of Cymera Festival 2021. It's brilliant. So yeah, soon when we get back in real life together next year, fingers crossed, eh? Yeah, well, picking up from what Anne was saying, I first saw Alba ad Astra, the original. There's the original one there. In Mike Calder's shop, Transreal Bookshop. One of my first visits to the shop. I thought, oh, that looks interesting. I love this idea of mixing reality and a little bit of weird and wonderful history. So I read that fairly not long after the launch of the actual thing itself. And I'm bumping into Madeline from time to time ever since, and Mike as well, saying, when's the next issue coming? When's the next volume coming out? And it didn't take long, about 11 years, I think, before eventually Madeline decided that the time is now. And she very kindly offered Shoreline Infinity the chance to publish it. So we're definitely thrilled to be able to do that. So I'm not going to let any more out of the bag. I think it's now for the rest of the team that's coming up. And we have got a fantastic lineup. So I'm going to hand you over now to actually the proper host of the evening. I'm going to step back in the background and put my screen up so I can just relax and watch the rest of it. I'm going to hand you over now to Pippa Goldsmith, who's been helping us with Shoreline for a few years now. And she also introduces the new volume of Alba ad Astra too. So Pippa, it's all yours for the rest of the evening.
Hi, Noel. Thanks ever so much for that introduction. And also thanks, Anne, too. It's really great to be here at the launch event for Cymera. It's really exciting. I'm sorry we can't all be together in person, but hopefully in the near future we'll be able to. So I'm going to be hosting tonight's event, which is going to be a series of readings and excerpts of music from all the contributors. And it's really great that we've got all the contributors here tonight. So we're going to start off with the editor, Madeline Shepard, in a minute. But I just want to say a couple of words too about my experience of interacting with Alba ad Astra. I first found out about this from Ken Mcclouds when we were working together many years ago now. And I was, Ken very kindly gave me a copy of the first issue, and I was instantly fascinated by this idea of weaving together sort of fiction and fact, and what is and what was and what might still be in the future in this really clever way, using sort of material objects and using actual history and perhaps sort of parallel universe too of what might have happened somewhere else in a different history. So I was really thrilled, not only when I heard that Madeline and Shoreline were getting together to publish this sort of latest edition, but also really thrilled to be given the opportunity to contribute a little bit to it too. So that's really why I'm here tonight. But so, as I said, we're going to be having a series of readings and excerpts of music from all the contributors. But first, I want to introduce Madeline Shepard herself. And Madeline would talk a little bit about the overall project and how it came about and why she was inspired to create it. And I want to introduce Madeline by sort of explaining to all of you who don't know her that she's an interdisciplinary artist with a wide range in science and maths and science fiction. And her work ranges from collaborative projects such as Alba and Astra, and also knitwear too. And she's infamous amongst certain circles for running a hacked knitting machine to create wonderfully sort of mathematically and space inspired knitwear. And I think there's a piece actually hanging behind you, Madeline, is there not? So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Madeline, who is going to tell you much more about Alba and Astra.
Oh, thank you very much, Pippa, for such a lovely introduction. I think I have successfully unmuted myself. Yes. My job tonight is to kind of set the scene without giving you any spoilers. So I'm going to take you back to 2008 when I was mooching about Edinburgh, taking pictures of old buildings, not so old buildings, you know, 60s and 70s, crumbling concrete. It's maybe Victorian metalwork that was rusting away, like you'll see on the cover picture. I'm wondering, maybe they weren't really what they were said to be. Maybe this big flour mill down in Leith was actually for building rockets. So this, I'm holding up the picture from the original because it's easy. But this is Chancellor Mill down New Haven in Leith, and it looked so like the vehicle assembly building that I had seen when I visited Cape Kennedy Space Centre in the 80s. I thought, maybe Scotland did have a space programme back in the 60s too. Maybe we did do stuff, but obviously nobody knows about it anymore. So I started kind of putting together a portfolio of pictures. So it all started as a art photography project. And my partner, Mike Calder, has Transrail Bookshop in the Edinburgh's Old Town, and he agreed to exhibit the pictures, and we would have it during the festival in 2009. And so I thought, we need some contacts. I need to contact some writers. And we were friendly with a group called Writer's Block. And I asked them if some of them would be interested in writing captions for the pictures, thinking, you know, 20, 30 words of something strange and slightly different. And actually, Andrew Wilson, Andrew Ferguson, Kirsty Wishart and Gavin Ingles were all really keen and took the ideas away and came back with an enormous amount of stuff. So, and they convinced me that I had to write the story that strung it all together, and then they would embellish it, and we all put it together like a kind of literary collage. A bit of a patchwork of ideas, and I think it just kind of grew arms and legs. What was going to be a catalogue with photos and maybe about 20 pages turned into 44 pages of writing. We thought, we need a forward, we need a celebrity. Let's ask Ken Mccloud. And he was so keen. I was amazed. But anyway, so that's how Ken got involved. And the exhibition was really successful. We got the booklet published ourselves, just put up the money to print it, and it was sold through Transreal with during the exhibition, because it was just, I kept thinking of it just as a catalogue, not as a book. But so many people liked it, and so many of the things that we did for the exhibition were more than just the writing or the photographs, because Gavin created not just the content of documents, but the documents themselves. And these are now reproduced in the new edition. And people thought they were real and wanted to buy them from the shop, from the exhibition, and it just kind of exploded for a bit. And then after the exhibition came down, it had a couple of other viewings in different places, and it was, the booklet trickled out of the shop slowly, and Writer's Block had a bunch of them to sell at their events, and we just kind of let it lie. And we kept getting together and thinking, maybe there's more mileage in this. And then Andrew Wilson came to me and said, I've written another story. And then Ken went off to do a residency up in Jura and came back with a story that was also relevant. And so both of these are now collected in the new edition as well. And it just, Gavin kept having ideas, Kirsty kept telling me she wanted to write about this or write about that. And so eventually, all the old copies had been sold, and we were, some of us at least, were at the launch of another shoreline project, which was called Scotland in Space, which Pippa was part of. And I'm not sure if people can see Pippa's screen. I'm speaking, but anyway, she's holding up a copy of Scotland in Space. The people involved in Scotland in Space, 2 or 3 of them apparently had read Alba at Astra, and so it was again bringing it all together again, with just all these loops and so on. And I spoke to Anne Landeman and 1 or 2 other people at the launch of that book, and they said, oh, you really should get it together. Yes, we need to do this. And then lockdown happened. I thought, well, we really should do this. Some of us, at least, like me, have got more time on our hands. So we did, and this is what we've got. We've got a new 140-odd page book with more photos, more writing, new writing specifically for this, as well as the collected pieces that were created in between, and all of the previous work, including the work that Gavin had produced but didn't get into the original book. So it's all there, it's all complete. You're still wondering what it is, aren't you? It's, I've written down a few headings. I said literary collage earlier, parallel history. A thought experiment where we all got together with the premise and ran off different directions with it. An exploration of lost potential. Because I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that it actually went wrong and got covered up. So Scotland's space programme was snatching defeat from the jaws of victory as usual. Some people just thought it was a joke. And there is a lot of humour in it, especially in some of Kirsty's work. But I'll leave you to discover that yourselves. But you really do need to read the proposal for the Scottish Pavilion at Expo 67. There's some true gems of Scottishness in there. But because there were so many people involved and so many different characters emerge from the different bits that they've written, and it's the narrative that I constructed about the failed programme, and then coming up to modern times, a young man or middle-aged man trying to find out what happened to his missing father, and discovering bits and pieces of the cover up piecemeal, and the two of us having an adventure doing that. But the others created really rich, deep characters like Thomas Campbell, Moira Mckechnie, Guy Mandersley, and George Purvis and Philip Dent, the two put upon civil servants. And they all brought, they seem quite real. And so even though they're only represented in short memos, and one of them, in fact, doesn't even have a voice, he's always being written to by the other one. So I'll just give you a brief one memo from George Purvis to Philip Dent. 3rd of December 1966, confidential, recipient only, from George Purvis, Senior Assistant Under Secretary to the Secretary of State, to Philip Dent, Pumping Station Project Director. Dear Mr. Dent, I write simply to inform you that following my downgrading from Senior Assistant Under Secretary to Assistant to the Senior Assistant Under Secretary, future correspondence on this matter should be directed to Mr. Bradley, Senior Assistant Under Secretary. My last involvement in this project is to authorise the transfer of the final tranche of project funding to your budget heading. This on the strict understanding that it will be used, as you say, for compensatory measures in relation to Mrs. McCracken and her son. Please note that the Works Division will be with you shortly, if they are not already there, to carry out the necessary dismantling. The various items of equipment per the inventory you so helpfully supplied shall be distributed to different locations to aid their assimilation into the landscape. You are to report to St Andrew's House on Monday for reassignment. I understand your new duties will be somewhat different. So you can see we have pompous civil servants, poor put upon assistants, strangely creative designers as well, and all sorts of musicians and a huge cast of characters who could all go on and have their own adventures. People who haven't been written about yet, the two other people who should have been in the space capsule but weren't. What happened to them? So there's lots of scope for us to go exploring, and there's lots of things that we can have big adventures with. Well, I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but there are some open doors in the new edition, and if anyone else wants to get involved, it would be great to have new people involved. Yeah, so thank you, and thank you very much to Shoreline for encouraging me to do this, for Cymera for the place to present it, and to Transreal Fiction for supporting it and for supporting me for so long. So, thank you all, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thanks, Madeline. That was great. And Madeline was reading out an excerpt of work in the book by Andrew C. Ferguson. And Andrew is a writer who has had poetry, short stories, and book-length projects published in various places over many years. And these include The Wrong Box, comic crime novels set in Edinburgh. And he's currently focusing on songwriting and playing in bands. And I'm reading out from his biog in the book, and it says at the end that he will soon live in Edinburgh. So I'm not sure whether this is speculative or whether this has actually happened. In any case, welcome to Edinburgh. So I next want to introduce Gavin Ingles, who will be playing some music for us. And Gavin works primarily in games. He's had interactive novels published through Choice of Games, and credits on Zombies Run, Call of Cthulhu. I never can say that. And Fallen London, a bit easier to say. He was Language and Cognition Fellow at the Department for Clinical Neuroscience, during which he produced a graphic novel about functional neurological disorder and AI versions of Jane Austen and H.P. Lovecraft's. And I think we are now going to watch a video created by Gavin.
Alba and Astra, Kyle of Butte, you are go in 4 minutes. Set stars on Voyage to Arcticus, roll 044, pitch 012, yaw 025. Over. Level synths arm time 8 plus 38 nominal. SII cutoff time 9 plus 48. Over. Okay, Hamish, the D-Sky read 35560 plus 044545, and Thistle 5 was minus 3.0. Over. Alba at Astra, Kyle of Butte, I have the liftoff plus 8 pad, Hamish, if you're ready. Beginning countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have liftoff.
Gavin, that was fantastic. That was so atmospheric and kind of uncanny, actually. One of my favourite words at the moment. Sort of strange imagining of sort of real city and rural scapes mixed up with this idea of sort of rocket launches. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions before we move on to the next readers, perhaps give you a chance to talk about your creation here. In particular, I wanted to ask you about Rocketry Scotland, this entire society that you've created and that are probably out there working as we speak, launching rockets somewhere. Do you want to say a bit more about them?
Yeah, you would hope so. It's interesting. I mean, so many of us, we at school they ask you, what do you want to do when you grow up? We're like, I don't know, really. And they're like, how about being an architect? How about being a physicist? Don't know. Thomas Campbell, the guy, the Rocketry Scotland guy, is a guy that if you'd asked him that when he was like 10, he would have said, I want to be an astronaut. And as he grows up and realizes he's not going to be an astronaut, he still wants to work on the rocketry program. He just wants to be involved. He wants more than anything else Scotland to be in space. And so he starts this magazine. I think his pal, in trying to get him to shut up about rockets, says, why don't you make a magazine about it? So rather than shutting up, he goes and makes this magazine about it. And it's the sort of story of a passion that never dies, from the birth of it right to the end. And he becomes very sick by the end, but he still puts out a couple more magazines. Yeah, it was a very happy day for me when Madeline got in touch and said, somebody's just tried to buy this magazine. This thing that is, yes, it's a fictional creation, and we've stuck it on the wall at the bookshop, and someone rich has just come in and tried to buy it. And they would have been very disappointed had they bought it, because the promising first page was stapled to a whole lot of blank pages.
Fantastic, but I mean, it is in danger of becoming real in the near future, because there's likely to be at least one, if not two, rocket launching sites in Scotland, in Sutherland, and maybe also in Shetland within the next few years. So, and this is what kind of so intrigues me about this whole project, is that something that seems so speculative and so imaginary can actually become real, and perhaps it partly becomes real through our talking about it. You
would hope so. One of the kind of themes of Rocketry Scotland, which is referred to, but you never actually get to read it, is this column Local Launchpad, where Thomas Campbell just hears from somebody in a letter that they've launched a rocket or tried to launch a rocket, and he just gets in his car and drives to like Lerwick or wherever he drives to, John O'Groats, gets sandwich, watches the launch, has the best time of his life, goes home and writes about it, crashes on a sofa, drives all the way through the night. And yeah, it's an exciting thought. I think there is a serious point there, which is any act like launching a rocket, any technological step has to be prefaced by an active creative imagination. You have to sit on the beach and think, we could launch a rocket from there. And I suppose that's what excited me about writing the stuff.
Absolutely. So I think we're going to talk more about that later. We should probably crack on with the next reading, but thanks again, Gavin. That was absolutely spellbinding. So I want to introduce Andrew J. Wilson, who is our next reader. Andrew J. Wilson's short stories, non-fiction and poems have appeared all over the world, sometimes in the most unlikely places. He co-edited with Neil Williamson the anthology Nova Scotia, New Scottish Speculative Fiction, which was nominated for a World Fantasy Awards. And Andrew was also put forward for the 2020 Dwarf Stars Award. Take it away, Andrew.
Thank you, Pippa. Now, I'm going to read a sort of edited extract from the story I wrote after the original Alba at Astra project. It's called The Last Man in Space. And just to give you a quick bit of context, some of us science fiction fans, writers, scientists, we meet up on a regular basis in pubs in Edinburgh and South Queensferry when Ken was there. And this is a kind of recreation of those times, but I introduce a character who refuses to give his real name. In fact, he calls himself Hugh Hugh Mann, which is a terrible pun, but relevant to the story. And he, hearing us talking about Scots in space, launches into this monologue. In the district of Angus, you can still see the shell of Lord Strathbungo's improved skyrocket manufactory. Nothing more than ruins now, but in its time the place promised Scotland the stars, if not the world. His lordship was a polymath and entrepreneur who became an enthusiastic student of those pioneering rocket scientists of the 1920s, men whose names I can never remember how to pronounce. Strathbungo envisaged a multitude of both commercial and experimental applications for rocketry, but he died, along with a number of his staff, in an accident involving concentrated nitric acid that occurred around the time of the Wall Street crash. His papers were left to the Scottish Rocketry Society, but were confiscated by the Crown, which is how I found out about this neglected fragment of history. Now, the Scottish Rocketry Society was a ragtag group of amateur enthusiasts who, despite spending most of their time in one pub or another, performed some experimental trials in the Campsie Fells in the 1930s. They were inspired by Robert Goddard, of course, but I believe that they were equally enthused by Wells and Verne, not to mention the garish American pulp magazines that arrived as ballast in transatlantic cargo vessels. Mind you, the drink might have had something to do with it too. These dedicated devotees put their limited resources to remarkable use. Several small projectiles were successfully fired from the concrete launch pad that they built high up in the hills. I even saw a few copies of their newsletter, Rocketry Scotland, which was published into the 60s. The National Library of Scotland is an almost complete run. The outbreak of the Second World War saw the end of such attempts to emulate Goddard, of course, but many of those who gave up so much of their spare time and disposable income would find themselves called up to serve their country by working on the military applications of their hobby. During the war, the government devised a fallback strategy that was to be implemented if Operation Sea Lion, the Nazis' planned invasion of England, succeeded. A new front was to be established along the border with Scotland. The military's ultra-top-secret missile programme, spearheaded by many scripted Scottish rocketry enthusiasts, was intended to form the last line of defence, or attack, in such an extremity. Our men worked all over the country, particularly on the test range on Barra, and came up with the Z1 flying bomb, one long whiskey-fueled night. The Buzzard, as they called it, was intended to be a primitive atomic missile. It was to be no warhead, since the explosion caused by the hydrogen-fueled rocket's impact with the intended target would be more than sufficient. Come now, gentlemen. As you should know, Fermi created nuclear fission as early as 1934, and he created a criticality with Szilard only 8 years later. I never suggested that the Scots invented any of this. Anyway, we can all be thankful that their work never reached completion, never mind sore use and anger, but this clandestine endeavour continued into the Cold War. While the Blue Streak was developed south of the border, the cream of the Caledonian Rocketeers concentrated on their own project, led by a young man named Fraser Ferguson. The English ballistic missile used liquid oxygen and kerosene as propellants, but it had at least twice the overall gross liftoff mass of the Scottish alternative. The project was a dead end, which explains its termination. On the other hand, as Ferguson said, we Scots knew that the way onwards and upwards must be nuclear. Well, to cut a long story short, and one that I've had to piece together over the years at that, our canny Scots developed a manned nuclear rocket at last. They obtained the fuel rods they needed from the Chapel Cross Magnox nuclear power plant in Annan. Officially, the primary purpose of Chapel Cross was to produce weapons-grade plutonium for the British nuclear weapons programme, while also generating power for the national grid, but it always had a third and wholly secret purpose. Ferguson obtained his test pilot, one Flight Lieutenant William McCracken, on an extended loan from the Air Force. And there we shall leave it.
Thanks, Andrew. That's fantastic. You make it sound like a sort of tall tale that someone spinning in a pub just for their own kind of amusement, just to sort of entertain people. And yeah, it's a tall tale wrapped around sort of scientific endeavor. And it kind of makes me realize when you tell it like that it's not a sort of linear story, either in fiction or fact. Like, we think we're making sort of scientific progress, and yet this progress can get stalled for all sorts of reasons before we take it up again. And perhaps fiction is really well placed to kind of explore that, the sort of nooks and crannies and sort of convey the sort of peculiarities of it. So yeah, no, that's great. I guess, do you want to comment on that, or perhaps we can talk about this more later? So that wasn't really a question, really. It was one of the.
We can pick it up later. One of the things I tried to do in the story was keep the science plausible for the time, and without giving away any spoilers, let me say that some of the complications that arise are due to the fact that things aren't quite advanced enough. But yes, the tall tale aspect of it. I had been playing around with this idea for some time. I mean, I fed some stuff into the project that I'd come up with back when I was a teenager, actually. And then after Alba at Astra, the first edition was published, there was a competition at Eastercon, the British National Science Fiction Convention, where they were doing a kind of tribute to Arthur C. Clarke's Tales from the White Hart. And most of the things were commissioned, but they said there's one slot, and if you sign up for a reading, you can you might have a chance of getting in. So I right down to the wire, I was still typing the story and running around looking for a printer on the Saturday afternoon. And it was early evening that the readings were on. I used some of my Alba ad Astra stuff to sort of spin out this style in a story in the style of Clarke, and it was great fun. It was great fun. But there's a lot of real stuff in there. What I say about the concrete launch pad in the Campsie Fells, that was a real thing. There were real Rocketeers who did that.
Fantastic.
Yep.
I really thought they just made that up. I was thinking Campsie Fells. They could never have that in a Campsie Fells.
This is the art, and everyone else is pitching. This is the art of it. Get as much real fact in there to bolster your wild inventions.
Absolutely. No, that's fantastic. So we'll move on to the next speaker now, but we should have time at the end for more discussion and also for questions from the audience. So audience, get ready to type those questions into the chat box after we've heard from all our speakers. So our next reader is Ken Mcclouds. Ken is the author of 17 novels, from the Star Fraction, published in 1995, all the way to the Corporation Wars, published in 2018. Many articles and short stories. He was born on the Isle of Lewis and now lives in Gourock, and he's currently writing a space opera trilogy. Take it away, Ken.
Thank you very much, Pippa. It's always great to see you. And you know, you're opening about the what you and Madeline said about the ways in which this project is kind of metafictional very much applies to the story I'm about to read a little bit from. It came about from a residency in one of the most amazing house I've ever stayed in for any length of time, in this case a week, which is the Jura Lodge, which was once the manager's house of the Jura distillery, and has been done into a guest house with the most extraordinary interior decoration, which at first, for the first night or two there, I seriously thought had once been the home of a vast, rich, eccentric Victorian family. So this is the story that I wrote in exchange for my stay. It's called The Jura Recovery. Do you believe in all that, then? Any science fiction writer will tell you that's the question they most expect when they admit their trade. Taxi drivers are particularly apt to chuck this one over their shoulder. The first to ask me, it went on, I had that Erich von Daniken in the back once. But it can come from anyone who isn't a science fiction reader, which of course means most people. This time, it came from the weathered-looking bloke beside me in the bar of the Jura Hotel. I'd just finished my fish and chips and was settling into my second pint when he struck up the conversation. Apart from two campers eating their dinner and sitting right against the far window, no doubt because it was the only place you could get so much as a glimmer of mobile reception, we were alone in the bar. We'd introduced ourselves and got talking about our respective jobs. His name was Hamish. I didn't catch the surname, and like many islanders, he did several jobs. A bit of building work up on the estate in the summer, driving a quad bike around and doing this and that, a lot of evenings out on the boat, catching lobsters and langoustines, a bit of building work. I told him about my considerably less arduous calling and how I'd been given a week's stay at the Jura Lodge in exchange for one short story in my own genre. And of course, he'd winkled the genre out of my shell. Do I believe in all what? I asked, though I knew. Little green men, Hamish said. He twiddled a forefinger above his head. Flying saucers, life on other worlds. No, I don't, I said. I mean, I wouldn't rule out life, even intelligent life elsewhere in the galaxy, but I don't think it's visiting us. And if it is, UFOs are very unlikely to be evidence of anything like it. Ah, so you do believe in aliens, he said. It's not a question of believing, I said, slightly irritating. It's a question of evidence. I'll allow the possibility of life somewhere else, but all the evidence about UFOs that I've seen tells me that almost all mistakes or hoaxes or maybe some unknown phenomena, not alien spacecraft. Why not? He sounded interesting. Supposing there's something unknown, I mean. Well, I said, trying to avoid a sigh, you'd think aliens who could cross light years would find it easy enough to contact us or hide from us. They wouldn't be doing the sort of things UFOs are supposed to, close encounters with farmers and backcountry roads sort of thing. Hamish cocked his head and thought about that. He took a sip of his pint and gazed off into the mirror behind the bar. Aye, well, he said, you might have a point about that. Doesn't matter anyway. He looked over his shoulder, saw we were still alone at the bar. The barmaid was around the other side and shrugged. I don't believe in aliens either. I'd seen one. A UFO? He shook his head. An alien.
That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Lovely meta, like you said, sort of self-referential fiction is always sort of fiction that kind of goes around like a snake eating its tail. That's great.
There's even more of that as the story goes on, I can tell you.
So remind me, Ken, was that written after the first edition, or was that in the first edition?
It was actually written after the first edition. In fact, in keeping with what you've just said, there's even a reference to that first edition and the Alba and Astra project in it. And just to really complete the loop, I was absolutely, thrilled to see some of the photos that I took on Jura, which inspired that story and illustrated the story in the book. You can see it and see them in the book. In Gavin's amazing and uncanny, as you said, presentation. Wow, I think we are breaking new boundaries in modern art here.
Yeah, I guess also one of the things that intrigues me ever since I first found out about Alba ad Astra is you can see its influence not on sort of subsequent versions of itself, if you like, but also on other sort of Scottish science fiction, other aspects of Scottish art too. And as I said before, we sort of briefly mentioned Scotland in Space, a wonderful anthology also published by Shoreline. But I don't think that would have happened. This anthology that looks at sort of possible future imaginings of Scottish space activities, I don't think that would have happened without Alba ad Astra to sort of trigger our imaginations. So do you think it's kind of been sort of formative in making Scottish science fiction over the past sort of 10 years or so?
I don't know. I mean, I suppose it influenced me to an extent, and it probably started the train of thought that led to an imagined Scottish space project in one of my more recent novels, Descent, which features a Scottish space project called the Rami, which is somebody described it in a review as a characteristically crap Scottish rocket.
Oh, wow.
I actually can imagine, yes, very easily imagine Scottish space projects in the not too distant future, and hopefully going on. You know, we have a big reputation to fulfill in that regard, as we discussed in the Scotland in Space book with the engineer Scotty and so on.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So I'm going to move on to our next reader. Thanks very much, Ken. That was fantastic. And I'm going to take us on now to Kirsty Wishart. And this is taking us off, I think, in a slightly different angle, perhaps, to the overall theme. We're going to weave in some music here. We're going to weave in new characters. But first of all, Kirsty Wishart is a writer whose stories have appeared in New Writing Scotland, 404 Inc. magazine, Product, and Biopolis Tales of Urban Biology. Her first novel, The Knitting Station, was published by Rhymer Books in March of this year. She's currently working on a book about Scottish psychogeography, and she loves a good wonder. And let's hear it from Kirsty.
Yeah, so hopefully maintaining the musical theme of the evening. This is the piece that I wrote for the latest version of Alba ad Astra, and it was great when Madeline came along and gave the opportunity to, come up with the following. One of the great things about revisiting the Alba ad Astra project is the opportunity it gives to shine a spotlight on other lost areas of Scottish culture. An overlooked star that burns with a fierce, unusual light is Moira Mckechnie, an unsung heroine of the early Scottish electronic music scene. I had been entirely unaware of her work until following up references made in the original Alba ad Astra publication to the composer Alexander Turnbull. He'd been commissioned to produce a suitably stirring work for Scotland's exhibit at the 1967 Moscow Expo, showcasing the planned space mission that, due to reasons unknown, never took place. The exhibit itself cancelled as a result. As Turnbull's previous work had explored the fringes of electronic composition, he must have been considered a fitting candidate to provide a soundtrack for a display of Scottish pride in technological achievement. Intrigued by the Turnbull archive referred to in Madeline Shepard's investigation into Alba ad Astra, I visited the National Library of Scotland and tracked down the file holding the original score of the Expo piece. I was interested in a note scribbled down the final few pages of the music, all Moira's work, ! And a red cardboard box that had been brought along to my desk, apparently in error, with a paper label on the front saying only Mckechnie's music. It was the quote marks around music in particular that drew me, and which I was to find typical of Moira Mckechnie's self-deprecating style. Opening the box up, I discovered not only spooled tapes, but an old scrapbook filled with newspaper and magazine cuttings on such female pioneers of electronica as Anne Southam, Delia Derbyshire, and Daphne Oram. There were also all too infrequent references to her own work being played in the Queen's Hall or late night on Radio 3. One of the compilation tapes found in the box included a recording of To the Stars, Turnbull's Expo piece, and the NLS were kind enough to let me listen to it on the equipment they had available. Midway through, having reached the section marked as being all Moira's, sitting there in a tiny listening booth, large earphones clamped to my head, I was reminded instantly of the work of Delia Derbyshire in transforming Ron Grainer's composition for the Doctor Who theme tune. If anything though, Moira's work outmatched Derbyshire's in its otherworldliness. There is a triumphant blast of the orchestra providing the perfect soundtrack to a rocket's takeoff, a recording of an actual engine blast also incorporated, the celebration of a Scottish achievement emphasised by the roaring droning from a 67-strong bagpipe choir. Moira's work, however, signifying the moment when the rocket itself is jettisoned, leaving the manned capsule to drift through space, is especially striking, spine-tingling in its effectiveness. The music moves from Turnbull's grandiosity into a more abstract, free-floating auditory exploration of weightlessness, the sound reminiscent of Roger Ligeti's Atmospheres, as heard in Kubrick's 2001, but more delicate, fragile, and yet with a certain steely, Thrawn quality. It sounds like the voices of a flock of space angels who may be offering both a welcome and a warning to these new adventurers. It is alienating, disorientating, and profoundly moving, the perfect accompaniment to an altered state, drifting, weightless, seeing Earth in all its glory beneath us, all nationalist sentiment suddenly petty. The fact that spaceflight, the exhibition, and any public performance of Turnbull and Mckechnie's work never took place added to the yearning, ghostly aspect of the work.
That's fantastic, Kirsty. That's sorry. It's really beautiful. It's really evocative. Could you say a little bit more about your creation of this kind of fictional music? Because I don't think, again, it's in the first version of Alba ad Astra.
No, it's not. It's just something that I'd had in my head for quite a while, because I do have this interest or fascination for people like Delia Derbyshire and Daphne Oram. And much like that, thinking of what would it be like if there was a Scottish space programme, I was thinking, well, what would the Scottish equivalent of those type of characters be like? So the whole story is really sort of an explanation of that. I'd also had in my head the idea for years and years of turning the Forth Road Bridge into a huge musical instrument, a huge sort of tuning fork. But it was one of those ideas that didn't have a place to go. And then Madeline came along and it was, right, okay, that's the fitting place for it. I found what I can do with it.
That's right, and I think it's really important to include it in Alba ad Astra, because it made me realise, of course, that when you have a sort of scientific advance, like space exploration, it's not just about science. It affects our culture, and our culture responds to it in very sort of wide and unexpected ways. And I love the way that you kind of capture that, you encapsulate that in your story.
Yeah, but yes, well, it's also sort of referred to in the previous piece that I wrote, which is very much about the cultural reaction. So yeah, Tunnocks TK is releasing a sort of space capsule range, or really having a story where he sneaks onto a spaceship or that sort of thing. So yeah, my stuff I think is very much like how it inspires artists or writers or knitters, anyone.
Which it will do if and when it happens in the future. So just to make just to sort of expand on this kind of meta fact-following fictional type aspect of what we've been talking about tonight, our next piece is actually going to be coming from Fergus Curry in response, I think, to your writing, Kirsty. And so we're now going to hear a piece of music by Fergus. I'm just going to introduce Fergus beforehand. Fergus Curry is a double bass player in the Greek National Opera. He is also a composer, origami designer, author, takemitsu scholar, captain of the Papagoo Veterans Chess Team, Tai Chi expert, poet, librettist, jazz arranger, model airplane designer, and amateur chef. In his spare time, which obviously he has like copious amounts of, he solves crossword puzzles and makes animation videos of his cat Ernesto. And he lives in Greece with his wife Maria. And I think we are now going to hear a piece of music by Fergus in response to Kirsty's story. That was beautiful. Thank you, Fergus. Absolutely fantastic. So that brings us to the end of our readings and music. And now I think we have a bit of time for audience questions. If you've got a question, just pop it in the chat box. And as a reminder, before we get to the questions, Alba ad Astra is now published and available from Shoreline of Infinity. And Noel is going to put a link, or has put a link to the page where we can buy it.
Hang on, I'm doing the tech as well as this.
Sorry, Noel. I'm gaily promising that you'll be doing things. Noel will now
I'll juggle for you as well, if you like.
So while he does that, I should say that part of my interest in this is in the sort of rather bizarre and perhaps a little bit esoteric aspect of regulation of outer space. So I used to be one of those pompous civil servants that we talked about earlier, who's actually responsible perhaps for part of the cover-up or other nefarious activities. Now I used to work in regulating British space activities through what is now the UK Space Agency. And it kind of gave me a lifelong interest in how people get things into outer space and who is able to do that, who is able to launch rockets into outer space, who has the ability to do that and who is allowed to do that and who is not allowed to do that. Madeline, you've got a hand up.
I thought I would just put a link in the chat to a project from Glasgow Science Centre from 2017, where they actually launched a Tunnocks tea cake into space. So I'll put the video there. When I was promoting this on Twitter, somebody responded and said, "We did this. Can't get much more Scottish than that." So, and I did remember hearing about it. And I thought, well, the only thing they could have done was fuel it with iron brew. That would have made it more Scottish. But anyway, if anyone cares to look, that's the link in the chat now. There's all sorts of rubbish up there in space now.
Well, that's true. I mean, that's a real that's a real serious issue. As it's been on the news lately, there's been damage caused to the International Space Station by a bit of space debris. And in fact, there's going to be an event hosted by Andy Lawrence, who's Professor of Astronomy at Royal Observatory of Edinburgh, in a couple of weeks to discuss issues around light pollution and so on caused by SpaceX satellites. So what feels like perhaps a sort of niche and esoteric activity of launching things into outer space is actually really affects us all in many ways. So I definitely own the vertical space above my flat into infinity, right? So this is a really interesting legal question. Nobody owns outer space. Nation states own their own airspace up to a certain height. And then beyond that, it's outer space is a kind of free-for-all in a sense. No nation can stake a claim to outer space and claim it for their own. And it's a bit like the Antarctic or the high seas. It's supposed to be free for peaceful use of all humanity.
Yeah, sure. The problem with owning the space above your house anyway is the Earth goes around the sun goes around the galaxy. That space isn't the same. So if you did buy the space above your house, it's moved 2 millionths of a second later. So.
Geometric.
Oh yes, that sounds like a great project for mapping out the shape of that space over a certain amount of time. Yes, and then knitting it.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions somewhere. I just saw one.
What personal item would you send to space, bearing in mind that you probably wouldn't get it back? Yeah. Yeah. What do people want to send to space?
Boris Johnson.
Oh yes.
Hands up if you agree. Oh yes. Ferguson is asking a question.
My neighbour's dog.
There are sadly, I think, a few dogs, including the famous Laika, sort of circling the Earth still. Quite a lot of monkeys, some cats. The French space project had a penchant for launching cats into outer space.
The
Madeline.
Russians also sent tortoises, and they came back alive. No, I was going to say there's also the untold story in Alba ad Astra, which is just hinted at in little bits by something Kirsty wrote about Kelty, who was a Scottish dog in First Dog in Space, who came back alive, but came to grief on Dunfermline High Street, sadly.
As you do.
But I've also had ideas that might put do a story, a lot of different stories about different realities for Greyfriars Bobby, and one of them was for him to be the first Scottish dog in space.
So we have a good question here. We have a couple good questions. The first one from Anne Suis. Aren't the Americans attempting to own the moon for mineral rights? Yeah, so what the Americans are trying to do, they're trying to get around this ban on owning the moon. There's actually a gap in the International Outer Space Treaty. You can't own, you can't stake claim to an object like the moon, but you are allowed to extract resources from it, like mining, for example. And so what the Americans have done is pass their own domestic space law that will allow companies incorporated in America to keep the proceeds from mining the moon and other objects. And yeah, so this is a really kind of grey area in law that people are sort of interested to see what's going to happen in the future with asteroid mining and so on. And so we have another question too. What does everyone think about private space projects? So I guess you're asking about private companies launching satellites into space, like SpaceX and so on.
Or even launching cars into space.
Yeah.
Mannequins at the driving wheel. Sorry.
So just as a reminder, SpaceX is Elon Musk's company, which is a totally private company that is planning ambitious exercise of launching thousands and thousands of communication satellites into space for the purpose of, supposedly for the purpose of improving internet sort of communication for countries who can't afford sort of ground-based technology. But yeah, exactly, is by astronomy. So that's the ostensible aim, but actually the aim is to raise money for the Mars project. So I'm not a fan of this, as you can probably tell. It affects astronomy really badly. You can already see the impacts upon astronomical images. And it just goes to show, I think, that it's actually really difficult to control what happens. And perhaps this is why we need science fiction to open up the debate about what we can do and what the likely impact is going to be, what we should be doing.
Yeah, it's kind of a question for Ken and his colleagues writing science fiction based in Scotland is, when you've got these ideas in Alba ad Astra and then some of the history and sort of pseudo-history, how much do you think this sort of influences other science fiction writers, and then how do science fiction writers influence the scientists as they're coming up through their education? Okay, did you catch that?
I can unmute myself. Oh, right. Yes, so I can. Well, I in terms of science fiction, I'm probably more guilty than most in promoting the idea of private space flight way back when it wasn't feasible, really. And I won't actually take back an awful lot of that. I don't approve of Starlink for the same reasons as Pippa. I think it's outrageous. And I'm deeply unimpressed with Elon Musk's plan to go to Mars. I managed to shock some people at a conference a few years back by saying I would be quite happy to see Mars left undisturbed by human boots for about 200 years until we have actually figured out what to do with it and what's already there. However, I think that that spaceship has sailed, as it were. We will have boots on Mars in the next, I don't know, decade or two, and I guess we'll just have to make the best of it. I mean, there is the immense frustration of looking at these little rovers on Mars, putting out their dinky little dentist drills and lasers and so on, and probing a few centimeters into rock, when you just know that a human with a geology hammer could answer all these questions in a few minutes. So there is that. However, there is still that lingering possibility of some indigenously derived life on Mars, which is, one of the deep existential scientific questions. If it's the same kind of life as on Earth, if somehow it's traveled by meteorite between the planets, then it's kind of wonderful, but no big deal metaphysically. But if there is indigenously derived life on Mars of any other body that we can reach, then it implies that life is pretty much everywhere, which just changes I think it has a lot of profound implications. So I really would rather that Mars was handled more carefully, and I kind of wish that science fiction had been a little more realistic about how awful life in a Mars colony is likely to be. I mean, even the good ecologically sound, literate, cultured socialist and great science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson, I think even he somewhat glamorizes what Mars settlement would be like. And he does face all the questions about it and so on. That these are wonderful books, but do we really want to encourage people to go there and live in tunnels in each other's sweat and stink and working to pay off their passage debt? It sounds like a complete nightmare. And I think maybe what science fiction, one of the great gaps in science fiction at the moment, I think, is kind of looking again at near future space exploration, within this century, and looking at the questions that it raises, legal and moral and political and economic and so on. Because I think we as a genre have kind of dropped the ball on that and left it to others to take it up.
But that's not going to be very exciting, though, is it? The nuts and bolts of going to Mars, for real, there's going to be so much bureaucracy, tiny engineering projects, regulations. Where do you make the excitement out of that? That's the main thing that makes a good science fiction story work, obviously, is the excitement. It's not meant to be a manual. It's meant to feed the imagination.
I disagree, actually. I think that is exciting because that's where the conflict comes in. And that's so we've got a couple of questions here. Essentially, what are the responsibilities of the science fiction community to engage with environmental issues involved? And I think that's perhaps what Ken is sort of alluding to here. We need to really sort of entangle with the real issues involved that we're faced with right now. And I think there are really serious environmental issues that are going to be caused here on our own planet as well as on Mars, if we let people sort of explore Mars unhindered. And science fiction is in a really good place to explore those because it's about conflict, and fiction reacts really well to conflict.
True. Let the fight begin, huh?
I'm just thinking that the sort of fiction you're talking about might sit better in what used to be called lab lit, I don't know if that still exists as a genre rather than science fiction per se. It's just very realistic thrillers or whatever written in a contemporary laboratory setting with real scientists, fictional characters, but being real scientists. That's maybe not really science fiction that you're talking about, or maybe Lablet is part of science fiction. Depends where you draw your boundaries.
Maybe we shouldn't get into that. But what we've got with Alba ad Astra, though, is the first start of Scotland's attempt to go into space, and we can learn from it. So when we do go to space with these new projects that Pippa was talking about earlier, hopefully they'll all be looking at Alba ad Astra, or the scientists and engineers involved in that, and learning from that as they're developing their ideas as Scotland really launches into space. So I think we've got a pioneering booklet here for scientists to work with in Scotland. So another question for you, Madeline. When you're actually writing this, or gathering the content for this, I should say, was there any point when you were developing it where you sort of got a bit lost in the world you were semi-creating and feeling as if you were in that real world totally? Did you get immersed into this world of Alba ad Astra as you were building it?
Up to a point. Certainly I would be walking around doing something else and I'd see a building or a structure or something. Yeah, I have to photograph that because it would fit in with the project. And that would go on from, not just at the time I was building it, but all the time since I've been collecting images. I don't know about getting lost in it as a writer, because I don't really see myself as a writer primarily, but certainly making things and thinking about it, and, thinking about the artifacts that might have been in the expo pavilion or something like that. I could go down a rabbit hole, wondering what to make.
Well, when I first came across the original, I was really confused when I was reading it because it sounded so plausible. And being an immigrant to Scotland myself, I thought, gosh, what have I missed? What have I not been finding out about until I came along to Alba ad Astra?
Yeah.
It took me a while to sort of cotton on properly.
I think as a child, I wanted there to be something like this, and this is me coming back to it maybe. But if I grew up in a very technological town, Grangemouth, just up the Forth from Edinburgh, where everything's around the petrochemical industry, but they were doing some quite pioneering research there as well. And it was just like the 60s white heat of technology. We're going to do all sorts of wonderful things, and then it all collapsed. So it's a kind of nostalgia project for me as well.
That's great, Kirsty.
Oh yes, Kirsty's just said in the chat that she wasn't sure if Alexander Turnbull did actually exist. And I have to say, I did actually take the names of real composers out of Fergus's contributions at one point, just in case they got upset. So yeah, but no, most of the characters are fictitious. Or they're very, very well known.
There may be fiction in our reality, but there's a reality somewhere where this is not fictional, I feel.
Oh, that's many worlds theory.
Fergus.
Can I just say about all the things that happened with the music and also with the Bill McCracken character, who's very dear to my heart. They're all about 50% based on real things. I love writing about things, as all of you do, and it's come out tonight absolutely that you love writing about things that fit into reality, but they extend the reality and twist it, but without losing a tangible contact with it. And all the musical stuff that's involved with this, the names and the places and even the pieces, for example, just a very quick thing, the piece with the 200 harpsichords that get hammered to pieces, the astral sacrifice, is based on a piece that John Cage wrote for, I think, I don't know, a dozen harpsichords. But anyway, the idea is that the ideas are there, but you take them somewhere else. And that's I think what Madeline's done with a book, you know, and that's you know, it's a brilliant example of taking reality and extending it and twisting it and forcing it into places that it didn't know it could go.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we're coming to the end of our time here, as it were. That sounds a bit elegiac, doesn't it? It's almost come up to the hour.
Yep, it's a sad time we have to finish, I think. But yeah, well, thank you, Pippa, for handling the herd of cats we've been dealing with today. And my job now is to sort of finish off with that thank you and to praise Madeline and the team for such a wonderful project, which has kept me going in the last couple of months where I suffered from all sorts of wonderful diseases that seem to be going around at the moment. So that kept me sane in a strange way, putting this thing together. So this is the chance to remind you, it is available, or will be available next week properly. It's the pre-order it just now on the website. I've just put the link back there again. So you haven't got a clue what we were talking about tonight. We got hints of interesting things. Here's your chance to buy the book and prove that we are wonderfully creative in this Scottish science fiction fantasy community. It's been brilliant. I said that because I just saw Anne appearing on the screen again. Hope you got your questions sorted. Oh, I shouldn't say that, should I? So yeah, it's available online. Alba ad Astra, edited by Madeline Shepard. Pardon me, wrong teeth tonight. And you can order it now. It'll be available in digital formats, ebook format, PDF and Kindle. And it'll obviously be, we're producing it as a fantastic, full glossy art kind of book with colour pictures and everything. With great thanks to Mike Calder of Transreal, who's helped to fund the project. So round of applause to Mike Calder and Transreal Fiction Bookshop. So make sure that you head down there. Soonest opportunity to visit his shop and buy Alba ad Astra if you want to prefer to do it in the real shop. And I don't blame you in the slightest. So I think that's enough from me. I think anybody else want to say anything before we finish off? Okay. Well, we'll say good night and
Sorry,
thank you.
can I
Sorry,
just say,
yeah.
Can everybody come? Oh, yes, I'm not muted. Can everybody come and visit Shoreline of Infinity and my brand, which is Not a Knot, at the Makers Hall for Cymera Festival, and we'll both be happy to talk to you or answer email questions or whatever Discord platform does for us. Yeah, we'll be hanging out as much as we can over the weekend. So yeah, pop in. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. That's right. And I should also say we have another event on Saturday night, Event Horizon for Cymera, which is our usual mix of stories, poetry, readings, music, and a next instalment of our drama, Reptilian Flux by the Infinitesimals. That's on a Saturday night at 8 o'clock. Get your tickets from the Cymera Festival website, which is going to be an amazing weekend. It's been a pleasure to be part of the launch event. So I think it's time to say good night, everybody. Get a good night's sleep and prepare yourself for a long weekend of fun and festivity. Okay. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Sleep well.
Night.
Sleep well.
Good night.
Thank you.